Okay, so let's get started.
Yes, we can start.
So good evening to all. My name is Mauro. I live in Porto Alegre. I'm a student of Logosophy and a doctor in Brazil. And I've lived here for about 9 years, but I'm from Niterói, Rio de Janeiro. I will present today's activity with Natalia, my sister, and the goal of this activity is to bring some of the benefits that we have achieved studying Logosophy over the course of a few years. But first, it is worth mentioning what Logosophy is. Logosophy is a science created by the educator and humanist Carlos Bernardo Gonzalez Pecote, in which he teaches how to live in a different way. Please, Mariana, could you put the slide where he's? Yes, thank you. He has been teaching me to see within myself a world of different thoughts and feelings that results in all my actions, in all my behaviors. And moreover, he teaches me to seek and understand the tools I can count on to know this world, and therefore build some abilities and weaken others to the extent of what I want for my life. I've been learning that I can understand and change my personality to enjoy life in its full potential, because the path to understanding my limitations can help me learn to overcome them. And all of these, reading and studying the work of this author, and the experimentation that all good science must have, where I will put these concepts to test in my daily life and confirm for myself if I should trust them or not. The strength that keeps me studying Logosophy over the years is the certainty that I should know myself, and I must strive to be better in every aspect of my life that I can. So I will pass it on to my sister, who will start with some aspects of her study and experience.
Good evening. My name is Natalia. I'm Mauro's sister. I've been a logosophical student for 15 years now. I'm also a doctor, and I've been living in the UK for 5 years. Our parents are students of Logosophy, and we both studied at the Logosophical Primary School as children in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And we will mention some passages of different logosophical books, which we have put in an image in a corner of each slide. And because they were translated from Latin language, just as an observation, the masculine gender is often used meaning people in general, not just men. So I'll start talking a little bit about how it was growing up. In school, playing with other children, we were taught to observe how the others were playing and how we were playing, to observe what thoughts were present. And little by little, I observed that the way of playing is a reflection of the thoughts that are present in someone's mind at that moment. So about thoughts, let me share. Logosophy affirms that the thoughts are psychological entities generated in the human mind, where they develop and even acquire a life of their own. I was taught to observe thoughts and separate those thoughts from people. I had a classmate at the primary school who was very smart and friendly in the classroom, but when it was time to play, he would hold the ball and not let the others play. Many years later, as a logosophical student and recalling this episode from my childhood, I was able to reflect about the thoughts. That boy showed the thought of selfishness when playing, but this thought was not shown in other situations interacting with him. So I ask myself, how do I manifest thoughts according to the situation in which I am? How did I feel when he showed that thought? Well, I was sad that I couldn't play with the ball, same as the other children. But in the classroom, teachers did work with different groups, and I had a chance to interact with him in these other situations and observe that he was a happy, friendly, intelligent boy. He had values and he liked helping others. It is easier to notice the thoughts that others have that push us away than our own thoughts that could be pushing others away, no? Before starting to study Logosophy as an adult, I experienced a situation with a longtime friend in which a thought she expressed was difficult to swallow. And at that moment, I found myself wanting to defend my thoughts from that thought. And in Logosophy, the author teaches, a man lacks a real self-control within him and an effective capability to grasp instantaneously the conceptions of things and facts. He's often surprised by his own reactions, and so, while his heart, always generous, is lavish in giving credits, his mind, which is less generous, reacts by reducing them. We have seen this fact occur in every friendship and also where feelings are invoked. In these cases, the heart immediately pulls its checkbook and gives to lessen the gravity of the situation presented by the person who expressed his material or spiritual need. But as soon as the check is drawn, the mind reacts again by retrieving it from the pocket and destroying it. I observed what the author explained. My heart wanted to overlook the comment, not take into account. After all, she had been my friend for many years. I tried to hold in the thoughts, but I couldn't. And I let out thoughts that tore the check in that situation. I realized that my words were also not very well received by my friend. Studying Logosophy, I was able to reflect about what happened. And then in another situation, another longtime friend commented on something I did, and I felt similarly. But because I had reflected on it before, I managed to preserve the check. But what is the importance of not tearing up checks? What do peers have that I can learn?
Well, Natalia, this study of relationships also interests me a lot. I acknowledge a great benefit in studying how to live better. One of the studies I've been doing is precisely about friendship. I've been questioning myself of what I've been doing and could have been doing to have better relationships. One of the aspects I have been studying about this topic is the next slide. Let me check, yes. In general, every person expects from others, if not everything, at least 90%, and considers excessive the 10% he gives. This attitude, which is strong, leads to the loss of many affections, friendships, and good relationships, which, if continued, would only be maintained for the sake of appearances. It is advisable and preferable, therefore, that each person gives 100% of what is expected of him. So, I see this distribution of effort in a friendship as a challenge, and I have been learning a lot and gaining a lot from this reflection. I often observe myself demanding from others within this friendship, and from then on, see how much I dedicate myself to it. Does this thought seem right to me? I have a friend since childhood, who has been by my side through many good and bad moments, and our friendship has encountered several mishaps recently. And I have been feeling very uncomfortable with him for some of his ideas and for some of the things he says and defends that not only I do not identify or support, but I support and defend the opposite. And I started demanding that he changed this behavior, that he changed this way of seeing things. I constantly felt that my reactive speech had not gone down well, due to the way I spoke or the content of what I said. I've been learning about this kind of feeling and how it is important. In Logosophy, the concept of sensitivity is seen as a radar that we need to pay attention to. I've been learning about this feeling, pointing me to something I do and leading me to reflect. And the author helps me understand this internal movement as the sensitivity in this paragraph. Thank you, Natalia. It is here in the individual inner self that the truth of the content manifests themselves detected by his sensitivity, which always acts ahead of the faculty of reasoning. The receptive ability of human sensitivity is faster and more effective. It quickly perceives the proximity of a truth and acts ahead of the faculties of reasoning and understanding, which are slow and refined in the analytical procedures. A fact that makes sensitivity a kind of a psychological radar, capable of detecting and announcing close and distant truths. Well, I've been learning with Logosophy that this feeling, this sensitivity, is like a radar that points me to something that I should pay attention to. But my reaction was so strong that I was always obstinate in not paying attention to that radar. A strong reaction that he was wrong and I should fix him. I had to point him in the right direction, almost like a moral duty. This has happened many times, and I didn't want to talk to him for days. And it got it to a point that these confrontations that I had with him reached a proportion far beyond what I imagined and beyond this internal radar. A concern with the exaggeration of the reaction and with our friendship led me to reflect. And I tried to apply what Logosophy teaches me, trying to recognize in myself what pushed me to that path and what I really wanted to be. How I saw this friendship in the coming months or years if I let these situations continue to escalate without control. So I realized that what bothered me was precisely this idea of me valuing his opinion so much. I demanded so much from him that his opinion, his thoughts, means a lot to me. I wanted him to see as I saw it. And this idea of wanting to change him could even go along with the intention of helping him, but he wasn't helping at all, and was still showing in our conversations. Because I demanded that he was different, but I didn't demand that of me. This idea put me in the comfortable position of criticizing him and authorizing or not some speech or behavior from him. And I didn't feel that this was the right way. I began to remember and organize everything that this partnership has already given me as a gift. And on the other hand, my obstinacy to insist on something that did not have the same value. So I found myself demanding 90% of him in what I could just tolerate of our differences I didn't do. It was like the 10% I offered to our friendship. As much as I convinced myself that this tolerance required a lot of me, deep down I realized that it didn't. They were thoughts that I could defend myself from, but without requiring others to do so, no matter how high my expectations was on the other person. Remembering the happy and apprenticeship moments that our friends provide us, tolerating seems to be much more feasible and practicable. I managed on several occasions to devalue this obstinacy in myself. until the time I thought I had it already been resolved. A few weeks later, again, I was intolerant and vehement. After those moments, I asked myself, again, didn't I already work this on myself? And the author helps me understand this delay. Could you please? Yes. It will be clear then that the first stage of the apprenticeship in the management of his inner life will be followed by the stages of improvement, in which the process itself will help to foster and consolidate substantial changes in the life of the individual. So, getting it right in some situations doesn't give me the guarantee that I've already learned and changed. Doesn't guarantee me that my character is already different. And there I was again, doing this process, not to overvalue this idea of seeking agreement on one argument or another. And whenever I did that, I felt more and more trained in my internal world, as if I already knew the path within myself to seek and have tolerance. And each time our encounters demanded that tolerance, more elements I took from the experiences which collaborated to strengthen this decision. Little by little, I was feeling really good about myself and our friendship. And this next passage of the author became clearer. I think it's one has to seek. Yes, thank you, Natalia. One has to seek, therefore, all the fragments of imperfection that demean the human figure. If among these fragments, some were found to be harmful to one's own figure, they will have to be destroyed gradually. I've been noticing several aspects of my character that I must destroy or weaken in order to cultivate the ones I want and consolidate them.
Living in society is something very interesting, right? So I also moved from Rio, and anyone who has moved away knows how precious the bonds we managed to have become. I lived in a different city here in the UK for almost 3 years, and I made connections there. But then I moved to the city where I am now, and we had 2 lockdowns in that period. I will try to share screen again. A second. So the author teaches that in order to understand creation, it is important to collaborate in the great task of mutual help, so that each one can find the fragments lost in the world, those fragments that the human figure lacks to become whole. What does that mean? In Logosophy, we learn not to believe what the author says, but to reflect and apply it in life. I have seen in my life how the lives of others collaborate with mine. I worked in different places here for a period. So I worked in the general hospital for some months, and then worked in 2 clinics about 20 miles away, a bit less than that, for about 6 months, and then back to the general hospital, and now in another clinic. And for me to work in the first clinic I mentioned, I felt the need to have a car. The bus would take about 2 hours, and taking a taxi there every day was very expensive. So I looked at cars to buy in the middle of lockdown, and I had never done this before. And here it's mandatory to have car insurance. And there are various types of car insurance and prices, and the rules depend on how long the person has lived here, passport, driving history, etc. I talked to several friends who have a car, and a friend I made in my first job in the other city helped me, and I found a car that suited my needs and didn't go over my budget. And also particularly the car insurance as well. After I bought the car, I had to pick it up. And I hadn't been driving for almost 2 years. And then I called a friend here who was one of my first contacts in this city, and he made himself available and went with me. So I picked up the car with him, and in the following days, we drove to the clinics, and I became familiar with the way there and driving there. So I felt a lot of gratitude for the help I got from those two friends. But what else could I learn for my life? I learned from their experience, from their example too, sorry. I learned from their example too. I reflected about what my conduct had been to receive this help from them in correspondence to how I was behaving as well, and if I had the same values. The generosity of both. In one, the willingness to help look for a car and insurance, and in the other, the availability to go pick it up in the middle of the day and get in a car and go for a drive. I saw in both of them generosity, discretion. I didn't see thoughts of intrusion or curiosity. I saw interest in helping. I didn't see indifference. I saw constancy in helping. It wasn't something that was promised and never done, for example. I didn't see lack of will. I saw decision. I didn't see a propensity to easy or to abandon. After all, I was the one who needed it, not them. So in addition to the help itself, I learned from the example of the thoughts they had. And with the author's teaching, I see that I can seek in my conduct whether or not I act with these thoughts. In Logosophy, I've been learning to observe values in the other and to cultivate them in my life, in myself, and to look for those fragments that the other has that I lack. Learning with who I interact with has allowed me to choose which thoughts I want to have, and allow me to build the Natalia I want to be. During this period, I could also practice being more courageous. I had to commit with a large amount of money and driving to work every day and driving on the left side of the road. And courage is another value I've been learning with Logosophy.
Well, Natalia, another very important study that I've been doing in Logosophy is about living with myself. Before, that seemed a little strange to me. But I live dailies with my ideas, thoughts, concerns, feelings, joys, sadness, plans. And this is a constant motivation for me to study my inner world. Some words from Logosophy that have been encouraging me on this path are below. What is happening and what has always happened during all the critical moments in human history is that man has been unable to find himself and has been less able to complement his life with which he lacked. This is why the human being is called an imperfect entity, because he needs to perfect himself. That is, to achieve his completeness. Since man is nothing more than a fragment of a figure that requires to be completed. So when I lived in Rio de Janeiro, I had a hard time seeing what part of my character and way of being was a fragment of myself, and what part was part of the culture that I unconsciously reproduced. The culture of my parents, the culture of my city and country, the culture of my relationships with friends and their lifestyles, and my individual culture. When I searched for what was part of me, I confused these aspects of my personality with aspects of my individuality. So when I moved to Porto Alegre, another city in another state in Brazil, and the environment in Rio, my family and friends had their influence reduced, some aspects of this difference started to become clear. I began to perceive, reflect, and modify ideas and thoughts that had an impact on my behavior, that were part of this culture that I had been absorbing without thinking and without deciding if I wanted to. I mean this related to several simple aspects of my life, such as my diet, physical activity, and entertainment. I also reflected about others, more complex aspects of this culture, such as dealing with problems, my limits for dealing with different stresses, occupations in my free time, decisions about my future, ways to cope with failure. And so I cultivated my individuality and I followed this path of discovering who I am, regardless of the environment in which I live. The author teaches in this passage, individuality, on the contrary, is the result of a constant cultivation of moral and psychological qualities which are latent in a human being. But above all, is the spirit, when formed consciously, that emerges from the very depths of man's existence. This is the reason why Logosophy leads man to a knowledge of himself through the conscious formation of individuality, since no other road exists, nor is there any other way to seriously undertake the achievement of such a noble objective. So the author brings this concept of spirit linked to my individuality and these latent qualities that I have. One of the things I really liked to do was going to the beach nearby. I would go for a run, walk on the sand, sit and gaze at the beautiful sea day or night, chat and have fun with friends. And I wasn't aware of how I used it, and even ended up depending on it to calm my mind. And that thought had no place here, because there is no beach here, among other things. I even tried to replace it initially with parks and other activities, but it's not the same. So over the months and years, I began to understand the reason for these thoughts and what I gained by doing it. The author brings in this next paragraph, man will come into possession of the key that will give him full control over his mental field and establish his mental defenses when he learns to know his thoughts and is able to locate them in his mind. When he's able to select and make use of the best ones. When he knows how to create his own thoughts instead of making use of someone else's. And when he exercises his faculty of thinking. But man must achieve a thorough knowledge of his psychological deficiencies and fight them in order to overcome and eliminate them so as not to leave vulnerable spots in his physical, moral, and spiritual person. Logosophy has been teaching me that from my mistakes and successes, I can create thoughts in my mind through my faculty of thinking. I've been learning to create good thoughts, value feelings that give me strength, and look for memories of achievements that had the same effect of giving me peace, energy, and joy. And I began to need less and less of the environment to do that for me. But I still see myself evolving. When I look back at this experience, I can feel and clearly see the evolution that I had and feel the confidence to keep learning, living, and enjoying. And I've been building and cultivating my individuality since then.
I agree, Mauro. This observation of what happens around us, of what influences our life, the observations of the other and the observations of my inner self, I only started to learn with Logosophy. Observe to learn and grow, not to criticize or diminish the other. Observe to improve and bring closer. The author teaches the observations that you make of your fellow men, as well as of everything that surrounds you, will enable you to improve greatly, correcting your deficiencies and enhancing your qualities. Thus, for instance, the good and beautiful features that you detect in other people will be useful to help you reproduce them in yourself. If, on the other hand, what you observe in them, for instance, their manners and behaviors, seem disagreeable to you, you can make good use of this to a certain impression that you would have on others if you had the same manners and behaviors. Therefore, try in every possible way and with strong determination not to reproduce in yourself what may have caused a bad impression. I started to understand the thoughts at the primary school, the Logosophical primary school, but it was only after becoming a Logosophical student that I started to learn and classify them and select the ones I wanted. I understand that by seeking these elements for my learning, for my construction, I make my day-to-day an experimental school to acquire more values and opportunities. I understand that this quest to complete my image will make me a better person by cultivating values. And I would like to conclude with more words from the author. Those words he wrote for his son You should study earnestly and predispose your feelings so that study fascinates you to the point where you gladly surrender to it. But do not interpret my words to mean that you should occupy yourself only with books. No, your studies must undergo a process of permanent intellectual activity derived from the faculty of observation, which you may exercise at every moment and wherever you are. Your life will then be a constant object of study. You will realize that no other study could be more gratifying. So we've come to the end of our presentation, and it was an honor to be here. What impressions did you have from these activities? What questions remain about Logosophy and the study that we do? What questions and impressions did you have about what it means to be a student of Logosophy? We hope we have brought an interesting topic to your attention. And if you identify with any aspect of what we've talked about tonight and are interested in learning more about Logosophy, there is a free course you can enroll through this QR code to learn more about Logosophy. And in the UK, we do it as an online meeting that we adapt to the person's availability. You can also download books from logosophy.org.uk website. The Logosophical Foundation is also on social media and can be connected by email. We are very grateful for the presence of everyone who's been here, and this webinar will be available later on YouTube. There are many other videos on YouTube by other students like us about different topics, sharing their experiences, and maybe you might find them interesting too. And all this information will be shared on the description below. On behalf of the Logosophical Foundation, we thank you all for attending this talk, and we wish you all a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.